At a young age, we are all drawn to superhero, like bad guys versus good guys stories. We love those even from a young age. And Batman has been such a huge part of my life. It's kind of shaped the person I am, what I'm interested in, what I like to learn about. So today I'm going to teach you about the history of Batman comics and how Batman stories have evolved with the times over the last 80 years. So in order for us to understand the story of Batman, we need to start at the beginning. Batman first appeared in comics in May of 1939. He was created by Bob Kane, the artist, and then Bill Finger, who was the writer. Batman was always a little different because his story is that he saw his parents shot in front of him, and then he got strong intellectually, physically, and then he started to fight crime once he got older. Batman was originally inspired by pulps, which means that he was violent. He actually used to carry a gun around. He had no remorse for maiming criminals or anything like that, but then they took that away because they felt like it was a little extreme. And according to the Rowe Gallery biography on Bob Kane, he says, "I wanted Batman, or Bruce Wayne's costume, to throw a terrible fear into the denizens of the underworld. If a huge bat came into your apartment, it would scare the heck out of you. I wanted to create a costume so awesome that crooks would be petrified." And over time, you would see Batman's physical appearance slowly change. His jaw would become more defined. His ears would get longer. And in 1940, due to his popularity, he got his own self-titled comic book series. And during the 40s, you would see Robin appear, which made the overall story a lot more kid-friendly, a little more comical, cartoonish. And so Batman was successful, but in the 50s, his popularity decreased because the storylines were just so comical and just so geared towards children that people just didn't want to read about it anymore. Until the 60s. He had become lighter, more kid-friendly, and the sales were so bad at one point that they thought we were going to have to cancel the Batman comic books. And this is according to the Comics Alliance website. So they decided to revive his older villains that were originally in the Batman story, so that they could bring back a little bit more of that seriousness, but it was still very comical and juvenile and campy. And the TV show would also appear, which was, everybody knows, that was basically a comedy. It was not an action like how we think of Batman these days. It was very comical, very cartoonish, but it really did well. But eventually in the late 60s it did get canceled, and because people were just tired of that same just comical, cartoonish, just over the top stories that they were so sick of them. So creators wanted to create a different Batman era. It was not going to be about the cartoonish, comical stuff anymore. It was going to bring Batman back to what he originally was supposed to be, the serious character. Joker became Joker again, as we all know him, became that psychotic, crazed clown instead of this over-eccentric, over-the-top, just not how Joker was meant to be in the beginning. We also saw a decrease in Robin, which decreased the level of cartoonishness and campiness that the comics and the TV show had. Danny O'Neill and Neil Adams were creators, and they had created the famous Ra's al Ghul and Talia characters. They are very much a part of Batman's lore, and we still see those characters years and years later. They're such a statement in Batman's overall story. But even though they did all these things to get Batman back up to his popularity it once was, it was still low. The popularity, the sales, they just weren't what they wanted them to be, until they brought in a new writer in the late 80s. The new writer was by the name of Frank Miller. He was very popular over in Marvel. He's the one who did Daredevil. He was a lot darker. He brought an older Batman. He was in his 50s when he wrote some of his stories, and he was older, just back to that more detective, dark side, not so much comical. He wrote The Dark Knight Returns in Year One, which is some of the most well-known Batman comics, and really changed how people saw Batman at that point. And these stories, The Dark Knight Returns in Year One, would inspire stories to come. Like in 1988, they came out with two of the most famous stories to this day, which is The Killing Joke, which is where Joker captures Jim Gordon and then shoots his daughter in the spine and shatters her spine. And then Death in the Family, which is where the first Robin dies. So I'm going to show you a video of Bob Kane talking about Batman, because in 1989 the first Batman movie came out, directed by Tim Burton. So we're going to watch some of this video about Batman and him creating him.
Thanks to this summer's media monster, Batman, there's not a generation alive unfamiliar with the Caped Crusader. The proud patriarch of Gotham's protector is cartoonist Bob Kane.
You created Batman when you were 19 years old. Did you ever expect the kind of ongoing success you've had with him?
Well, holy phenomenon, Kelly, I tell you, it's just amazing. And it's 50 years now, it's the 50th anniversary of Batman. It seems like only yesterday. I feel like 18 years old, don't feel any older, and I don't feel any more famous, so to speak. I think it's an amazing phenomenon. It's just a happening, and you can't explain a happening.
The happening happened because Kane never doubted his dramatic destiny.
I knew what I wanted to do when I was 10 years old. I was really a compulsive doodle-holic. In New York, I used to scribble on everything, on the sidewalks of New York and on the buildings and on my school book. And I just knew I wanted to be a famous cartoonist.
Batman's been through every cartoon incarnation.
So this movie was very popular. It really hit off the Batman movies, and they would continually make movies over the next 2 decades, even more. And this would transition us into a new age of Batman. You didn't see the comical, the over-the-topness that they once had. This would be Batman as we know him today, as a dark figure. And there would be more movies to come in the 90s. They would have 3 more box office movies. They would have the animated series, which was very popular. You would see people like Bane and Harley Quinn appear in the 90s, who became very much part of Batman's lore. He gained so much popularity during this time thanks to all the different media he was getting, from movies to shows to the comic books. And this would continue. He would continue thriving into this modern era of comic books. During the 2000s, you would see stories like Batman and Son appear, and you would also, Frank Miller was writing these, and you would also see a storyline called R.I.P., which is a storyline he used to show that everything from the beginning to that point was canon. Nothing was out of the actual story. It was all part of Batman's story from 1939 to in 2006 time period when he was writing these. He would bring back those old characters like the vampires and stuff Batman was fighting, and all that weird stuff that people like to push aside and say wasn't actually a part of the story. He used this to say this is part of the story, and this is why Batman is so powerful, because his superpower is that he can overcome the ultimate evil. And as of 2017, according to the Best Life Online, 460 million copies of Batman comics have been sold around the world. And over the next years, we would see the very famous Dark Knight trilogy appear. We would see different movies like the Lego Batman movie. They would make the animated movies like The Killing Joke, Assault on Arkham, and you have the also very popular Arkham video games. And I have a comic book actually. It's #1 of the New 52, which this was years ago, but you can just pass it around and look at it. Batman still looks how you imagine him to. He has the defined jawline and pointy ears. He looks very kind of menacing. And according to Box Office Mojo, all the movies put together, the Lego Batman movie, The Killing Joke, the original Batman movies, the Dark Knight trilogy, those would all come together to have grossed about over $4.9 billion in box office sales. I also forgot to show y'all a poster of the first Batman comic. This was before he had his own story. This is the very first one he appeared in, was number 27. Forgot to show y'all that earlier. Batman has gone through lots of changes over time, but he is still one of the biggest superheroes we know in this day of age. We still see him everywhere. He's still so popular. And a writer by the name of Mark Tyler Nobleman, he's a writer of Bill, the Boy Wonder, the secret co-creator of Batman, he would say, thanks to Bill Finger, who was the writer of the original Batman stories, Batman was the first comic book superhero to have a psychological reason to wage war on crime, because of him seeing his parents get shot right in front of his eyes, and you actually see that in the comic books. From a young age, we all love superhero stories, and whether we're super young or old, we love to hear them. It's something that's always tied to our heart, especially if our generation has grown up with superheroes. I feel like we all love superhero stories in this generation. And I'm going to give you a quote that Batman says in Batman Begins. It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me.